Welcome to the Infinite and Beyond, the MIT Alumni Show. I'm your trusted host, Rob Kalwarowsky, MIT Class of 2010, world-renowned executive coach, author, and speaker. Each week, we are sharing the stories with our friends and classmates, fellow MIT alumni who've taken action to shape the world. We'll share what we've learned, top strategies, and bring our community together to help everyone achieve our goals. No, this show is not officially affiliated with MIT, so any views expressed on this show are of the host and guest only. This show is designed to build a community that trusts, connects, and shares with each other so we can all take action towards a better world. Let's get rolling. Welcome to the Infinite and Beyond MIT Alumni Show. Of course, today we have another special guest. Course 2, 2010, Laura Marshall's with us, and some of you may know her as Laura Aust. Laura, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Great, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Now, Laura, of course, we gotta ask you, where have you gone and where are you today from when you graduated in 2010?
I have gone a lot of places. I initially, after graduation, I came to England, where I am now living. I was very fortunate to meet my now husband, and he did an exchange at MIT, did the Cambridge MIT exchange. And when we graduated, it was just easier to come here. And I did a master's in management when I got here, largely to get the visa, but also because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and then did the classic for our generation or our class. I went into management consulting and discovered very quickly that that was not for me. So I left after about 18 months, and I then just happened to be in the right place at the right time and ended up meeting some people who were starting or restarting a family luxury watch company. And they needed someone who had engineering and business understanding to run their product development. So I ended up getting involved there and running the product development for that business for about 5 years. And that took me a lot of places. I spent a lot of time in Switzerland for that job. Had to learn French very quickly because turns out people who make watches don't speak English. So that was a little baptism of fire. But so I did that for about 5 years. And at that point, both my husband and I had started to get a little bit itchy feet, if you will. And I think I've always probably been looking for the alternative path, if you will. So I've often sort of found myself on a whim taking unusual choices and going unusual places. So my husband and I decided we'd take a career break, and we bought a sailboat, and we spent a winter fixing it up. And then we spent 3 years sailing it about 2/3 of the way around the world, seeing a lot of different places. Ended up spending COVID in the Pacific and some other crazy things in between. And then after 3 years, decided that we were ready to come home, particularly because COVID was sort of locking everything down. We hadn't been able to see family. So we decided it was time, came back, and we've been here ever since. We're really lucky to shortly thereafter welcome 2 lovely kids. And
Amazing.
yeah, and been back in England ever since. But as I was saying to you earlier, now I'm starting to get itchy feet again. So we'll see. But yeah, that's my short story of where I've been.
Amazing. So before we jump into the sailing, I just want to ask you, so for everyone listening, of course, the Super Bowl was, I think it was last weekend, and Tom Brady was wearing a $1,000 watch. Now, I do want to, of course, since you worked in luxury watches, like, can you tell us a little bit about, like, what is, like, for me, I was like, I don't even understand how a watch could be worth that much money, but
Great question.
can you tell us, like, a little bit about, like, how do you, like, you were the product manager. So like, how would you even conceive making a watch that way? Or like what kind of, just give us a little background on that.
Absolutely. First and foremost, I would say I agree with you. I think it's a little nuts when you get into the hundreds of thousands of pounds for watches. And genuinely at that point, you are paying for brand. So it is, I spent those 5 years working very deeply in the luxury, in the making of the luxury watches, because the company I worked for made most of the price point was in like 10 to 50 grand. So not 750, but I understand the inner workings, and you literally can't spend you just can't spend that much money making a watch.
Yeah.
Like you put all the gold and the platinum and the diamonds and the like crazy complications that there's only one dude in some weird hut in the mountains in Switzerland that can make that specific mechanical thing. Even with all that, you're paying largely for brand. And to be honest, that is the case for the majority of big luxury watch brands, is that the cost to make the watch is 10% of what you've paid. So that's the dirty secret of luxury watches, particularly things like Rolex. They're very well made. They're extremely well made. They're extremely reliable, but the cost to make them is pennies compared to what you pay. So yeah, a little dirty secret. But talking about conceiving of it. So to be honest, it's a bit of a strange industry because the mechanical part, so the mechanical part of the watch that drives it is the core pieces of that, the kind of the core components that allow that to be accurate and allow that to be made these days are all only made by a very small number of companies and are very tightly protected. So it's not something that just anyone can make. And all of those companies are buying those pieces in. So the mechanical engineering side isn't actually as exciting as I would like it to be, because we're pretty restricted in our ability to mess with the actual timekeeping component. So largely my role is, okay, we work with the people who make they're called movements, who make the movements, and we build the case around it. So that largely where that comes down to is there's a designer and he's drawn something on a napkin. And then my job was to basically be everything between that and the physical product. So I made it in CAD, so built it in SolidWorks, figured out, how do we divide this up into components? How is this going to be manufactured? So, okay, can we mill this on a 6-axis milling machine? Are we going to have any of this handmade? What's the water resistance requirement? Even though nobody takes these watches diving, it's really, it's really important that they all have amazing water resistance. So we spend a lot of time figuring out how thick the glass needs to be. And it's not even glass. It's a special type of sapphire. It's man-made sapphire crystal. So it's not even glass. So we spend a lot of time, okay, what's the curvature going to be? What are the gaskets going to look like? How is this components going to be together? And some components are harder to make than others. So for example, the teeny tiny little screws that hold the case, like the back on the case, there's like 3 companies in Switzerland, and all they do, and they literally in the mountains somewhere in these like weird little towns, and all they do is make these tiny little screws because they're so hard to make. And so then you have to kind of take that into account. Okay, what can we, what kind of forces are they able to withstand? What can we make this watch do? So there's a lot of juggling with the constraints of how parts get made. So there are things like the movement or how the hands get made or the screws, where you're picking from a small set of pre-existing things and then build around it. So it always starts from best case scenario. I make something beautiful in CAD that's exactly what the designer wants, and then we like slowly chip away at it until we get to something that's actually possible to be made. And it's a complicated process because there's the industry is so specified, the knowledge is so deep in any specific area that we end up working with probably 10 big companies just to get the main watch made, and then there'll be lots of other little people around that. So you might we want to decorate this dial in a special way, so there's artisans who do that, or we want to make a special strap out of a special material, so we need someone special to do that. So it's this kind of massive dance between all of these many suppliers, most of whom don't speak English, and they all think that they're the most important ones. So there's just this like sort of very strange politics of getting everything to work together to then actually have a finished product. So how would yeah, I've given you a very long answer to your question. I'm sorry, but it's a complicated,
No. It sounds
complicated.
like a lot of challenges on supply chain, and so it's really good to experience.
Isn't it? It's a really odd industry, like really interesting, but I have not come across another, and I'm sure there are plenty that are like this, but not come across another one so far that's so like oddly narrow in certain areas. And the fact that for much of this, English is really actually unhelpful. It's so unusual to come across in business. Like that was really hard for me to adjust to. I was like, okay, you have to learn French because no one's going to speak to you if you don't show up and speak French. Okay.
That's so funny. And what you're totally right on the diving specs. Like I had to watch a couple of years ago, and it was like I forget, it was like 1,500, 2,000 meters or something. It had like a valve you could press to like release gas. And I was like, I just pretty much just want this to not break in the rain or when I wash my hands. That's good enough for me.
Well, I think that's like part of the challenge in the industry is everyone knows that no one's actually, or very few people are actually going to take them into those conditions. But it's that kind of the challenge for the challenge's sake to like say that we've done it, to say that we've achieved that because it's hard.
When you were at MIT, did you feel like you were the only one who didn't belong? Do you compare yourself with successful classmates? Do you feel like you're constantly needing to do more to feel like you're enough? Many of us feel that. I felt it too, but you don't have to feel that way anymore. You can get better results, achieve more, and feel more fulfilled doing it. I can say that because I've done it, and I coach my clients to do it too. I use scientifically proven methods, including internal family systems, values-based leadership, and habit-building techniques to transform your psychology and your life. These trusted strategies will get you results quickly, in some cases, even in our first session, and they'll last you for years. Now, my coach isn't just about learning. It's about taking action and creating results. Results that'll boost your confidence, unlock doors to opportunities you never thought possible, and equip you with strategies that only a select few ever master. But here's the thing, the longer you wait, the more opportunities slip by. Imagine what your life could look like just weeks from now. Having taken the first step, take action now. Go to robkalwarowsky.com and book a complimentary call with me. So Laura, of course you were sailing for 3 years, and as COVID hit, which is another wild challenge in the middle there. So
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about that? Like what spurred you to go out and take that time? And then as you were on that journey, what did you learn about yourself?
So I think what ultimately spurred me to go and us to go, so it was really a partnership with my husband and I doing this, is I like have a really clear memory of I'd probably been working for maybe 6 months in my first consulting job right out of after my master's. And I remember coming home at like 8:30 p.m. and like being miserable and having this memory, like walking back to my flat from the tube, thinking, oh my God, is this just it? Is this just gonna be my life the next 30 years? Because this sucks.
I've had the exact same thought as you.
Yeah. And like, I remember walking in and like, breaking down crying with my husband and be like, oh my God, is this our life? And he had been having the same feelings. And so we had hatched at that point. So this was very early on, we'd hatched this idea that, what would that dream look like? And that was around the time there were a few, this was sort of the beginning of the vlogger, of the YouTube stars. And there were a few people sailing around the world doing what we eventually did and making videos about it. And my husband had grown up sailing, and we did that a lot as vacation. So we sort of came up with this idea like, we could do that, even though we have no idea what we're doing. We could do that. And I don't know, we just kind of got it in our minds that that's what we were going to do. And when we finally had the money to do it, we just sort of thought, well, I don't want to wait till I'm 60 and assuming I get there, which I hope I do, but there's no guarantees in life. And then I'm going to be older and my body's not going to work as well. Like I want to do this stuff now while I've got the energy. I don't have kids. I don't have major responsibilities in life. My parents are still young. They're well, like I can do this and I'm not risking that much. So yeah, so we decided, why not? Why not now? Why not do what is really stopping us? And so, yeah, we did it. We just said, screw it, we're going to do it. And flew out to Croatia and bought a boat,
Amazing.
as you do.
Yeah, it's funny, right? I mean, of course, I've had the same thought. Was I think I was depressed, right? And I was working in my first mining job, and I guess I was 24, and I was like, do I have to just do this for another 40 years? And then my next thought was like, I don't understand how people can do this, because my parents did it,
Same.
and I'm like, am I just like broken in some weird way that I can't even compute how people do this? And
I
it
agree.
still took me like from that thought, and obviously had many times, but it still took me another, I guess around 7, 8 years to sort of kind of unlearn that pattern.
Yeah.
But like, I'm sure a lot of folks out there listening now have that same kind of idea. And I think you're absolutely right, is like, take the moment now versus waiting till you're 65.
Yeah. Exactly. It was by far the most transformative experience of my life, and I wouldn't change it for anything. We had some wild times, but it, yeah, it was really beautiful, and it also kind of has given me permission to think about things in a different way. So coming back, I looked at the idea of work differently and the idea of ambition differently and what is important in my life differently. And yeah, and I've made very different choices about what I'm doing with my time and I what I think is important and what's worth my time. And as a result, I know I'm a happier person than I would have been. I know if I'd stayed in that path, if I'd stayed, if we just stayed doing the career ladder thing, and for us, that wasn't going to work. And it's nice to kind of have seen and be like, hey, it's okay. You don't have to follow the conventional path, and it doesn't really matter where you came from. And I think I was held back mentally a lot by this idea that's like, well, hey, I'm like quote unquote high achieving. I went to MIT. I need to do something important, quote unquote important. Like I need to impact the world. I have to invent something special. I need to say, cure cancer or something like that. And actually, it's okay to not do that, and that's not necessarily the most important thing in life. So I'm really glad that we took the leap.
It's a weird thought. I struggled partly with that too, was this idea that for 4 years, like, everybody was like, you guys are future leaders. You're
Yeah.
amazing. You're so much smarter than everybody else. You're this, you're that. And then you go out into the workplace. And for me, I was like, well, I am smarter than everybody else, but for some reason that's not working.
Yeah.
And it's this idea, like, I know now, obviously, is like, there's a lot of, like, I coach people on politics and like how to build power and influence and leadership and like these type of things, where before I was just like, well, this is the answer and you're wrong. And that's just what it is. And I don't
Yeah.
understand why you can't understand it, because this is the data and this is what it says. And obviously, partly, like, that does not land well with a lot of folks. But it was like this, yeah, it was, am I just going to be this, like, basically some version of engineer and move up marginally and do that? And I mean, the biggest, like, obviously, like, it became no longer feasible for me to do that. But now, sort of stepping past that, it's not, and I don't want folks to think like, oh, yeah, you just give up achievement and you just like don't do anything and you meditate on the top of a mountain, right? And there's probably like 4 people in the world who do that, right? But if you actually dig into some of like the ancient wisdom kind of practices, like in Buddhism, they talk about enlightenment, but it's not this state that you just reach and stay forever. It's you take it, you sort of, I don't know, achieve it or transcend to it, but then you always come back. And that's the part where, it's not about like not never having goals again or never trying to do things. It's just doing it in a different way.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about what is genuinely important. And I think that I came out of my educational career is the wrong word, but journey, I guess, feeling like the quote unquote correct path was the upward path was I need to have a prestigious career and I need to be very senior in that world, and I need to develop a deep expertise in something, and that's my role, or that's what good looks like, and that is a good path, but that's not the only path. And it turns out that was definitely not the right path for me, and that's yeah, like you said, that's okay to like look at and think about goals differently. And so goal doesn't have to be I'm going to be a CEO or I'm going to be, a partner or whatever. It could be it could look totally differently. It could be like, actually, maybe in my life, money, like I'm not actually that career minded and I'm just going to do something that pays the bills. And actually, my joy is going to be sailing or my kids or art. Or, I don't know. But there are other paths that are equally valuable and valid.
Yeah. And it's like ultimately for folks out there, right? It's what makes you feel the best, right? So what Laura and I have done doesn't necessarily mean that you can't love consulting and like succeed and do that, right? So not like we're not telling you how to live your life, of course.
No,
It's very much about how you feel while doing it.
exactly.
Now, Laura, we did talk a little bit about one time where you had to avoid some pirates, and so I'd love you to share that on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a really odd experience where we were in the Caribbean. So this was our second year on the boat. We started in the Mediterranean, crossed the Atlantic, and then spent a whole season, a really wonderful season in the sailing up and down the Caribbean archipelago. But then when you get to hurricane season, you have some choices to make as someone living on a boat, because you can get yourself into very dangerous situations. So you either need to be prepared to really watch the weather and like make tracks if a hurricane develops, or you get out of the hurricane zone and put your boat in storage and wait out the season and come back. So we decided that the right thing to do was the latter, was the safer option. And despite the fact that we did all this crazy sailing, I would describe my husband and I as reasonably risk averse. So we mostly made decisions that were what's the safest option. And so what that means is you have to go far enough north or far enough south. And far enough north is very far. So south is the right option. And the place to go that gets you out of the hurricane zone is Trinidad. So it's the very farthest south. And by far south, I mean, it's like you can see Venezuela from Trinidad. So right down the bottom. And that's where you get into this issue, because Venezuela has long been having challenges. And what's happened is that a lot of piracy is developed in the area, particularly around Trinidad, because it remains a reasonably wealthy one of the Caribbean islands. It's very large. And so it has a lot of industry, a lot of trade. And for sailors, that can be an issue because we tend not to be terribly able to defend ourselves. So it's reasonably common for boats to be approached by pirates and they take all your money, take all your stuff. And in a couple of occasions, people have also been injured. So, very long-winded way of saying, what the season that we were there, the Trinidadian government decided, well, what we're going to do is we're going to encourage people to put convoys together and then come down as a convoy, and they'll be escorted by the Trinidadian military to make sure that we don't have any run-ins with pirates. And I sort of accidentally managed to, I didn't think I volunteered myself for this, but I sort of seemed to get put in charge of the first convoy. So I ended up coordinating this group of 10 boats, and we all set out together, and there's this like giant destroyer off. You can't really see it, but it's like off in the distance. You kind of know it's there.
Rules.
Terrifying, like really weird situation. And we all sailed down. It's about an overnight sail, so I don't know, 8 or 10 hours, something like that, uh, to sail across from Grenada down to Trinidad. And we were very lucky on the way down. Not a peep. Everything was completely fine. But on the way back when the season started again, I'm not sure if I talked to you about this before, but on the way back when the season started again, we had like a genuine scare where we we were sailing back and we had all of our lights off. Like normally we sail with lights on, with like all of our like position being shared, lots of like communication stuff, and you have all that stuff off because basically don't want pirates to be able to see us. And we did have, and thankfully we didn't ever get boarded, but we heard like several motorboats. We couldn't see them, but we like heard them approaching around near us, and that was very scary. But thankfully, I don't know if it's because we like had all our lights off and we're not running the engine, so it's really hard to hear the boat because if you're just sailing, it's really quiet. So I don't know if we sort of managed to evade an actual sticky situation or if it was nothing, but that was definitely one of our scary stories. Anyway, it is a dangerous part of the world. So yeah, who knew that pirates still existed?
I thought you were going to tell me about how you bought like a large cannon with cannonballs.
Interestingly, almost all of the Caribbean islands you wouldn't have been allowed. So when you checked into the island, they would have taken them off you. And so almost no one, I'm not sure we ever met a boat that was actually armed because almost every country that you could sail into would just take them off you, wouldn't let you have them. Maybe because they thought we were going to be the pirates. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there you go.
Yeah, it's a wild story. So Laura, of course, this show is a lot about it's about building community. We have the upcoming reunion at the end of May, and we also want to support each other. And so the first question I always want to ask my guests is, how would you like to support the other 2010s in achieving their goals?
So I think the best thing I could do is if there are other people who have dreams of doing something unconventional, that I would love to be a support to people about that, whether that's like, hey, how do I like financially make this work? Because we ended up structuring our finances so that we could save up money to do this, and it was not a cheap thing to do, and figure out like how do we live while we're not making anything. So I don't know if people need that, but I'd be very happy to support that. Or if it's more the motivation to like, hey, I'm here to like chat about what are the like interesting and crazy things that you want to do if you want to do them, and be a sounding board. So I'm very happy to be a support to anyone who wants to do something unusual. And especially if you wanted to do any crazy sailing, I've got all the resources.
For folks out there, so right, like if you feel that tiny feeling inside where you're like, where Laura and I had talked about, 10 minutes ago, right? It's like reach out, right? Because often you have that little voice in your mind or that little feeling, and it's like you want to listen to that a bit more. And we've been trained a lot in our lives is like shove that down and be logical and smart, right? But it's what Laura and I have also experienced, right? Is this, it unlocks a lot of different things. And so it can feel wildly scary to be like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and sail around the world, right? But what you learn on the other side of that, or through, actually more through it, but as you learn, it expands your perspective immensely. And so if you have that feeling or that thought like, hey, I would kind of like to do this, reach out. Like Laura's LinkedIn is in the podcast notes, so you can message her there. Or of course, for me, my email is in the podcast notes as well on my LinkedIn. So definitely hit us up.
Absolutely.
Now, yeah, Laura, what are you working on? What's your goal at the moment, and how can folks support you?
That's a great question, Rob. I'm actually kind of trying to figure that out. Since I came back from sailing and I had my kids, I've been working as a design engineer at another watch company. So I took a little bit of a step back, just been doing a lower key role just while my kids have been really little. That's all that I really felt like I could do. But now I'm trying to figure out what the next step is for me. I'd like to do more. I'd like to have, get back into the world of work. And I'm trying to figure out what that looks like. It's kind of an interesting full circle experience, having worked and then decided I'm going to take this break, gone and done the sailing thing, had a very different life. And now kind of coming back full circle to actually I'm in a place in my life where I'm excited to have like a full-time job and work on something and build something, but build something stable, like from a home base that is on land. So I'm figuring out what my next opportunity is. So that's where I'm at.
Amazing. So obviously for folks out there, if you have any ideas or thoughts or opportunities for Laura, definitely reach out as well. Laura, the last question I want to ask you is the big question. How would you like to impact the world?
It's a tricky question. I think my main goal is for my kids to not ever feel the pressure that they have to make a conventional choice. And I think that's the privilege that I'd like to pass on. So not so much the have the funds to do what they want, but to have the permission to make a choice. So if they don't want to go to college and because they want to do something else, if they want to go to technical school, or if they don't want to do that at all, I'd really like them to have permission to do that, because I think I would have followed a different path and I would have found the joy in my life sooner if I hadn't felt kind of pressured to follow a specific path because I happen to be quote unquote gifted. And I'd like there to be a broader range of choice. So it's maybe a small thing, but I'd like my impact to be the freedom to choose a bit more.
It's funny. So the other day I was listening to a show and they were talking about unlocking your inner genius. And they said that your genius comes from Latin, but it means inside. And so it's not about how we were taught genius is very much, you're good at math, you're good at science, you're good at school, you're good at this, you're good at that. And it's really where I work with folks a lot is inside is where you find the magic, and then that creates your outside. So amazing stuff out there. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. Where can folks find and connect with you?
Well, I think you said you'll put my LinkedIn in the show notes. If you're happy to put my blog as well, there's all of the stories of our sailing, all the wild weather and crazy injuries and everything else we got ourselves into is there if anyone ever needs to kill some time and wants to look at some pretty pictures and videos. And yeah, reach out to me either of those places.
Amazing. So we'll drop that in the podcast notes too. Awesome, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Laura, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.